Noemi stood on the bustling corner of a busy avenue, her small hands clutching an old, dented can. Her clothes were worn, stained by dust and the sadness she carried. Her large, expressive eyes watched the passers-by, begging for a little attention, a little compassion. Beside her, seated in a rusty wheelchair, was her father, João, a man whose strength of spirit contrasted with his frail and debilitated body. Ever since João had suffered an accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down, Noemi's life had changed drastically. Once a cheerful girl, running through the neighborhood streets and attending school, she had now become the family's primary breadwinner, begging for a few coins to ensure a meal on the table. Despite the hardships, Noemi and João shared a strong bond. She knew he would do anything to protect her, even in those adverse circumstances. They spent their days together, she begging for alms while he watched, unable to do more than offer words of encouragement. On a particularly difficult afternoon, Noemi was about to give up. People seemed more hurried than usual, completely ignoring her. She looked to her father, feeling helpless. He smiled at her, a smile full of love and hope. "Don't give up, my daughter. Better days will come," João said, his voice soothing her as always. Determined to continue, Noemi moved to a busier area. As she walked with her father beside her, she noticed something strange. João was restless, his eyes constantly turning to the entrance of a luxurious hotel across the street. "What's wrong, Dad?" Noemi asked, curious. João hesitated for a moment before responding, "Nothing, dear. Just an old memory." Noemi frowned but didn't press. They stopped near the hotel entrance, where there was more foot traffic. As she begged for alms, she noticed something that confused her. A well-dressed man emerged from the hotel and waved to João, who nodded in return with a slight movement of his head. That simple gesture planted a seed of doubt in Noemi's mind. Who was that man? And why did her usually reserved father seem to know him? Before she could ask more questions, an elderly woman approached and placed some coins in the can Noemi held. "Thank you, ma'am," Noemi said, with a genuine smile. The woman caressed the girl's dirty face and looked at João with a mix of pity and compassion. "God bless you both," she murmured before going on her way. As the day progressed, Noemi couldn't shake the image of the mysterious man and her father's strange behavior. Finally, as the sun began to set and the streets started to empty, she decided to ask again. "Dad, who was that man? Do you know him?" João looked at his daughter, his eyes revealing a whirlwind of emotions. He sighed deeply before answering, "It's a long story, Noemi. A story I hoped I'd never have to tell you." Noemi felt her heart race. There was something more to her father's life that she didn't know, something that could change everything. She grasped her father's hand tightly and said, determined, "I want to know, Dad. I need to know." João nodded slowly. "All right, dear. But not here. Let's go home, and there I'll tell you everything." On the way back, Noemi was anxious, thoughts racing through her mind. Who was that man? And why did he seem so familiar to her father? She knew that when they arrived home, she would uncover a truth that would change her life forever. Upon arriving home, a small wooden house in a modest neighborhood, Noemi helped her father inside and settled him in the wheelchair. The place was humble but clean and tidy with what little they had. She sat beside him, her large curious eyes fixed on João's face. "So, Dad, who was that man?" she asked again, the anxiety evident in her voice. João took a deep breath, as if preparing for an internal battle. He began to tell the story, a story he had kept secret for many years. "That man is Carlos, an old friend of mine. Actually, more than a friend, he was my business partner. Together, we ran a successful business, a luxury hotel. I had a comfortable life, we had everything, until the accident happened." Noemi was shocked. She never imagined that her father, the man who now begged on the streets, had once had such a different life. "A luxury hotel?" she asked, incredulous. "And what happened after the accident?" João paused, his eyes lost in painful memories. "After the accident, I was paralyzed and unable to continue working. Carlos took over everything, promising to take care of me and ensure I had what I needed to live. But over time, he started to drift away. The hotel thrived even more, and I was left behind. I didn't want to be a burden, so I accepted his help for a while, but then I decided to leave and live on my own. Noemi felt a mix of anger and sadness for her father. How could someone abandon a friend and partner in such a difficult time? "But why didn't you tell me this before, Dad?" she asked, tears in her eyes. João held his daughter's hand, tears shining in his own eyes. "Because I wanted you to grow up without that burden. I wanted you to be happy, without worrying about the past. But now I see that you are strong and deserve to know the truth." Noemi wiped away her tears and looked at her father with determination. "We'll get through this together, Dad. No matter what happens, I'm here with you." João smiled, proud of his daughter's strength and courage. "I know, my dear, and with you by my side, I know we can face anything." In the days that followed, Noemi continued to beg, but now with a new determination. She began to watch more closely the people around the hotel, trying to understand more about what was happening there and how Carlos was involved. It was during one of these observations that she saw something that left her perplexed. Carlos entered the hotel with a group of well-dressed men, all laughing and chatting animatedly. But what caught Noemi's attention was that among them, there was a man who seemed to be a regular customer, always receiving special treatment. Determined to uncover the truth, Noemi began to plan. She knew she needed more information and that she couldn't do it alone. She needed the help of someone she could trust, and she knew exactly who to turn to. Noemi found her old friend, Pedro, a neighborhood boy who had always been an ally in her little adventures. Pedro was sharp and agile, always willing to help. "Pedro, I need your help," Noemi said, explaining everything she had discovered about her father's past and the mysterious man from the hotel. Pedro listened attentively, his eyes shining with the excitement of a new challenge. "Sure, Noemi. Let's find out everything that's going on in that hotel. Let's unmask this Carlos." With Pedro's help, Noemi began to devise a plan to infiltrate the hotel and find out more about what Carlos was up to. They decided that Pedro would enter as a customer and try to get close to the influential men who always gathered there. Meanwhile, Noemi would continue to watch from the outside, ready to act if anything went wrong. They knew it was risky, but they were determined to uncover the truth and bring justice to João. That night, Pedro entered the hotel, pretending to be a young man interested in making a reservation. He was well received, and with his natural ability to blend in, he was soon chatting with the staff and trying to gather information. Noemi, outside, watched anxiously, waiting for any sign of trouble. She trusted Pedro, but she couldn't help but worry. After a few hours, Pedro left the hotel, a triumphant smile on his face. "I did it, Noemi. I found out where they keep the important documents. They have an office on the second floor, and the security isn't very attentive. We can go in there and get the evidence we need." Noemi felt a mixture of relief and excitement. They were one step closer to unmasking Carlos and getting justice for her father. "Great job, Pedro. Let's prepare and go in tomorrow night. We have to be quick and careful." As they planned the details, Noemi couldn't help but think about her father and how he would react to all of this. She was determined to bring some joy and hope back into João's life, and nothing would stop her from achieving that goal. The next night came with a palpable tension in the air. Noemi and Pedro met at the corner where it all began, their hearts beating fast with anticipation of what was to come. "Are you ready?" Pedro asked, his eyes fixed on Noemi's. "I am. Let's do this for my father," she replied firmly. They headed to the hotel, each step increasing the adrenaline in their bodies. Pedro led the way, already familiar with the layout of the place. They entered through the staff entrance, which Pedro had discovered the day before. Moving silently through the corridors, they reached the office on the second floor. Pedro checked if the hallway was empty before gesturing for Noemi to proceed. They approached the door, which was locked. "Wait here," said Pedro, pulling a small toolkit from his pocket. He began to work on the lock, and in a few minutes, the door opened with a soft click. Entering the office, they began to search for the documents. Noemi opened drawers and rifled through papers, while Pedro checked the computer. "Here!" exclaimed Noemi, finding a folder full of financial documents. "This proves that Carlos is embezzling money from the hotel." Pedro looked over her shoulder, a satisfied smile forming on his face. Perfect. Let's take this to the police. As they stored the documents, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Noemi's heart raced. They needed to get out of there, and fast. Let's go, whispered Pedro, pulling Noemi by the hand. They left the office and ran down the hallway, trying to be as quiet as possible. They reached the staff exit and escaped into the cold night, the documents safe in their hands. Noemi felt a wave of relief and excitement. They had what they needed to unmask Carlos and bring justice to her father. But she knew there was still much to be done. Pedro, thank you for everything. You were amazing, she said, hugging her friend. You're welcome, Noemi. Now let's take this to the police and make sure Carlos pays for what he's done, Pedro replied, determined. They spent the rest of the night planning their next steps. The next day, they would take the documents to the police and file a formal complaint against Carlos. They knew it would be a tough battle, but they were ready to fight. The next morning, Noemi and Pedro went to the local police station, carrying the folder with the incriminating documents. They were nervous but determined to do the right thing. When they arrived at the station, they were greeted by a duty officer who took them to the chief. They explained the whole situation and handed over the documents. The chief, a man with a serious but kind appearance, listened attentively to Noemi's story. He leafed through the documents, and his expression grew darker with each page he turned. "This is very serious, miss," he said finally. "We'll investigate this immediately." Noemi felt a wave of relief. They were being taken seriously, and Carlos would finally face justice. In the days that followed, the investigation was swift and efficient. The police discovered that Carlos was involved in a series of illegal activities, from embezzlement to money laundering for local criminals. The evidence was overwhelming, and soon he was arrested. João, upon hearing the news, couldn't hold back the tears of relief and gratitude. He hugged Noemi tightly, feeling a huge weight lifted off his shoulders. "I don't know how to thank you, my daughter. You were amazing," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Noemi smiled, happy to see her father finally relieved. "I just did what was right, Dad. And with Pedro's help, we did it." Pedro, who was beside them, smiled shyly. "It was a team effort. And now, you can have a better life." João nodded, touched. "Yes, thanks to you guys. Now, let's focus on rebuilding our lives." With Carlos out of the way, Noemi and João began to plan for a better future. They still faced challenges, but now they had hope and a new purpose. Their story of struggle and courage served as inspiration for many in the community who rallied together to offer help and support. Over time, Noemi and João's lives began to improve. The community came together to assist the family, and soon they received donations of clothes, food, and even a new wheelchair for João. Pedro remained a loyal friend and ally in all their adventures. He helped Noemi return to school, encouraging her to pursue her dreams and never give up. One afternoon, while Noemi was studying at the small table in their home, João watched her with a proud smile. He knew that despite all the difficulties, they had something that many didn't, each other. "I'm so proud of you, Noemi. You're the bravest person I know," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Noemi looked at her father, her eyes shining with gratitude. "And I'm so grateful to have you, Dad. We'll overcome everything together." Their life was far from perfect, but now they had hope and a new perspective. Noemi's courage and João's determination inspired many around them, showing that even in the toughest circumstances, the power of love and family can overcome any obstacle. As the night fell, Noemi lay down beside her father, holding his hand tenderly. They knew they still had a long way to go, but together they could face anything. And so, the story of Noemi and João continued, a tale of courage, love, and hope, showing that even in the darkest hours, there is always a guiding light.